Highway. I'm Tony Kriz, and that's Sean Glanning coming in from the great state of Kentucky. Sean, great to see you. Sean's a talented, gifted communicator, author of the book 10 and the book Story of God, the Story of Us. Sean, one of the big questions that you've been tackling through your life is how to help people embrace the Bible, the Judeo-Christian scriptures, and how to do that in different settings, both as a preacher and as a small group leader. And one of the things that you've done is really delivering the Bible as a story. Mm-hmm. In fact, your book, The Story of God, The Story of Us, is sort of about that and how you've gone about sort of framing the Bible for people. Could you tell us about sort of that innovative way of viewing the Bible that helps invite people in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a story that I first heard maybe 14 years ago. And to that point, I never knew the Bible was telling a story. I knew the Bible had lots of stories in it, but really I thought it was more of a rule book that had some people who did some interesting things. But really it was, what God was telling us how to live our lives. And then when I sat at the feet of Mary Fisher, a New Testament scholar who taught me the story of God, she opened my eyes to really something that was right there in front of me. And right there in front of all of us, that's easy to miss because the Bible is not written like a book. It's 66 books, even more if you're Roman Catholic. And it's not in chronological order. But as you begin to read it and understand that it's a story, then suddenly that was for me a transformative experience and something that I felt myself compelled to learn more about. And then as I learned more, to share that with others, especially those either who've never read the Bible or who the only Bible they've read, their experience of that has been very negative. And so that's what my wife and I have been doing together for the last 12, 13, 14 years, and we love it.
Could you give me an example of maybe a section of the Bible or an aspect of the Bible that people tended to think was pretty boring, but the way that you've framed it, it's helped bring it to life?
Well, again, even that phrase, it's helped bring it to life, reveals that it is alive. That it's that we come to it in a certain way, position ourselves, that we find it to be dead in many ways. And so the problem is with us. And I think it's because of the way we approach the story. And a lot of that is because of even maybe the story we think it is telling, which is one about we're bad people and God is going to punish us horribly for all eternity unless we respond to what Jesus has done for us, and then we get to go to heaven. And that's a very short version of the story I grew up hearing, but I don't find that to be very compelling anymore. And certainly the folk around me don't seem to either. But when we widen out the lens and we take a different view of what God is up to, then that becomes a much more beautiful story. And so I think part of the challenge is if we think the story begins with Jesus, who is the beginning of the story of Christianity, then rather than that Jesus is actually the climax of the story of Israel, and so if we understand the story of Israel, then we'll understand Jesus. The trouble is we don't know the story of Israel because that's the quote-unquote Old Testament. And so we're much more focused on Jesus and Christianity. If we don't know the story of Israel, then we won't understand Jesus. And if we don't understand Jesus, then we end up just remaking the story in our own image. And so we read the Bible and we read things that, that are okay for us, that don't make too many great demands on my life. And what I have found is that when I walk through the story with people, suddenly they're like, oh my goodness, this involves absolutely everything there is in my life, in the world around me, and even stories that are so familiar. Suddenly we see them in completely new ways, in fact, maybe understand them in completely the opposite way to what we used to. And that's why I'm so passionate about helping people understand the big story I think the Bible is telling. Because once we get a hold of that, then we open up any of the other stories in the Bible, and suddenly we have a framework within which to place it and maybe begin to understand it in ways where our story gets connected to that story, which is part of God's story.
Fantastic. Everybody, if you want to learn more about that, about experiencing the scriptures that are already alive, I'd encourage you to get Story of God, the Story of Us. That's Sean Glanning. I'm Tony Kriz, and this is Off the Highway.